Long before Leviticus described the scapegoat, Noah performed a similar ancient version of the ritual. From inside the ark, Noah sent out two birds, and the birds he chose were intentional. A dove, a clean bird, and a raven, unclean. But why these two birds? And why did Noah release the raven before he released the dove? Most people miss what's happening beneath the surface of the flood story. But once you understand the ancient significance of ravens and doves, the ark begins to look less like a boat and more like a floating tabernacle. The birds begin to function as part of a ritual. And when Peter later says that baptism corresponds to the flood, suddenly his claim makes a lot more sense. I learned a lot as I was researching this video. I'm even thinking of turning it into a book, because for me, it's changed the way I understand the flood. And I'm pretty confident it'll change the way you read the flood story too. Obviously, we need to start with Leviticus. Leviticus 11 contains a list of unclean birds, and in the middle of that list sits the raven. In my previous video, I hinted that there was a mysterious story around why the raven is unclean, and today we're going to find out why. Out of all 12 tribes, God selected one tribe to be his priestly representatives, the Levites. And then, after a period of 7 days, the priests entered sacred space. Inside the holy sanctuary, it was the priest's role to distinguish between clean and unclean, and to bring animal offerings into God's presence. And these priests were specifically required to be a spotless image of an Edenic human. The flood story begins with God selecting one man out of the many. Noah is introduced as a spotless man among his generation. The flood story ends with Noah presenting an offering to God on an altar. But there's more, a lot more. The biblical story of the flood contains a world of creation and priestly parallels. After Cain, corruption had increased on the earth to the point that God says he will wipe it all away. God commands Noah to construct a sanctuary with specific rectangular dimensions, eerily reminiscent of the tabernacle. A sanctuary with 3 levels, much like the tabernacle with its 3 sections. Animals are brought to Noah and they enter into the sanctuary. And of these animals, a distinction is made between clean and unclean. 7 pairs of clean animals enter into this holy sanctuary. And then, before any rain appears, Noah is instructed to wait inside the ark for a period of 7 days. There's more. On the first day of the first month, that's the same day that the tabernacle will be set up, we suddenly discover that Noah's ark has a covering, which is a rare Hebrew word used exclusively for the coverings on the tabernacle. All these details are intentional, because later, when we watch Noah releasing 2 birds from within his tabernacle-like sanctuary, all at once we've got a new framework through which to understand the flood story. And that framework is atonement. Talking about atonement, we missed a step. As Noah is preparing the ark for this watery wiping away, we see Noah, spatula in hand, wiping something over the surface of the ark. The King James Version says, "You shall pitch it within and without with pitch." What's Noah doing? Wiping pitch onto the ark? Is he waterproofing it? Covering it? Sealing it? Keep those images in your head. It's the first time this word pitch has appeared in the Bible, and I think it was inserted here as a little clue. The word pitch in Hebrew is a little 3-letter word, kippur, or KPR. You probably recognize it from Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement. It's complicated, but Hebrew words have stems, and they supply different information for the word. So here, Kippur is technically a different word, but Well, it's the same verbal root with a different stem. At its most basic level, the root meaning has got something to do with wiping. Tim Hegg is a Hebrew scholar, and he helped me untangle the root meaning of kippur. He says the base meaning is to wipe away. Kippur, or atonement, wipes sancta clean. And sancta means something to do with the sanctuary, or sacred space. Hegg says, it cleans sancta that has been defiled, removing the corruption, restoring it back to its former condition. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you probably heard me talk about Mary Douglas. She's an anthropologist who's written some great books on Leviticus. She says, atonement does not mean covering a sin so as to hide it from the sight of God. It means making good an outer layer which has rotted or been pierced. Noah wiped on pitch. He was sealing an outer layer, or restoring a surface. But when this word is used in a priestly sense, when the word atonement appears, it's the idea of wiping off or wiping away. And then, when you read Leviticus and you see atonement being made for the tabernacle, it's essentially wiping away the impurity and corruption, restoring the tabernacle to its intended condition. Simply, atonement is an act of restoration. Okay, quickly, the ark is a floating tabernacle, but it's also a floating garden. In Genesis 1, out of the pre-creation chaotic waters, God formed a three-tiered cosmos, separating the waters beneath from the heavens above, with the dry ground in between, on which he planted a garden, and in that garden, humans and animals lived together without fear. Creation culminated with rest. God rested. He created a holy space in time, a seventh day, for humanity to participate in his rest. And in Genesis 2:15, while most translations say that God placed man in the garden, it literally says God rested the man in the garden to cultivate and to keep it. And that is basically the goal of creation, for humanity to join God in his rest, to cultivate the land, to have dominion over the animals, to be fruitful and multiply, and to fill the earth and to subdue it. Yet, tragically, instead, humans fill the earth with violence and corruption. At this point, humanity couldn't be further away from God's rest. And it's here, at this moment, who do we meet? Noah, a man whose name means rest. A quick note about corruption. In the garden, Adam and Eve both took from the wrong tree and brought corruption into the garden sanctuary. And it didn't take long for the corruption to permeate and to infect the whole earth. Just 3 chapters later, we read, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and full of violence. And God looked upon the earth and saw that it was corrupt, for all living creatures on the earth had corrupted their ways." God sees how this will play out. He sees the direction humanity is heading. If they're allowed to continue in corruption, they will destroy themselves. God sees the end. The end of humanity has come up before me, says God. And so, says God, I will wipe away everything from the face of the earth. Here, when God says wipe away, he's using a word that elsewhere is used for wiping clean a dish. So in 2 Kings, God says, I will wipe Jerusalem clean, just as one wipes a bowl, wiping it and turning it upside down. The flood is beginning to feel like an act of cleansing. Was the flood punishment, though? No one's painting the flood as a pleasant experience, but we need to be careful. A flat reading of the flood as primarily punishment misses the bigger and, I think, primary image. The flood is a cleanup operation, and I think we're supposed to feel rumblings of atonement. And this is why I think restoration is a good way to understand atonement. God used the floodwaters to wipe away the violence and corruption, restoring creation to its former state. And yet, did it work? Did it fix the problem of evil? Before the flood, God observed that the thoughts of the human heart were evil all the time. And after the flood, the thoughts of the human heart were evil all the time. Apparently, water is not enough. So, what is the solution? Perhaps a regular flood was needed? Perhaps an annual cleansing? An annual Day of Atonement? That was a good segue, hey. A quick summary of Day of Atonement. Imagine Israel camped in the Sinai desert. Outside, the wilderness was a place of chaos and impurity. Over the year, the sin and impurity of Israel had accumulated inside the camp. It had contaminated holy space, even contaminating the holy sanctuary. The solution? A Day of Atonement. A day of wiping clean. Or, as Andrew Riera calls it, a day of decontamination. In Leviticus 14, a variation of the scapegoat ritual is described. It's a ritual for cleansing a contaminated house, and it involves 2 birds, water, and blood. Leviticus 14 says to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and a hyssop branch. So one of the birds is slaughtered over fresh water in a clay pot, and in Hebrew, fresh water is literally living water. Next, the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop branch, and the live bird are dipped in the blood and the fresh or living water, which is sprinkled on the contaminated house to cleanse the house. And finally, in verse 53, the live bird is sent out into the open fields outside the city. In this way, he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. On the Day of Atonement, the 2 goats follow the same pattern, but with one very significant difference. One of the goats will cleanse the most holy place in the middle of the tabernacle. The first goat is a purification offering. It becomes smoke and it ascends into God's presence as a sweet-smelling aroma. And the lifeblood of the goat is brought into the most holy place itself, where the blood is used to cleanse the mercy seat. Listen to this. Verse 16, so he shall make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness of the Israelites. He is to do the same for the tabernacle which dwells among them, because it is surrounded by their impurities. The second goat, although it started as a spotless goat, is about to become a courier for corruption. The high priest places both hands on the head of the goat and confesses all the corruption, the impurity, and the sin of all of Israel onto its head. And then this poor goat is sent out of the camp, out into the wilderness, where it's released. It has, in effect, transported all the impurity back to where impurity belongs, out into unclean chaos space. And for obvious reasons, this contaminated goat was not allowed to come back into the camp. The flood, as well as being an act of cleansing, is also an act of decreation. There's not enough time to go through it all here, but it's fascinating. Read the flood story carefully, and you'll notice that everything God ordered and separated at creation is undone in the flood. God removed his hand, and the waters ceased to be separated. In the flood, creation has returned to chaotic waters. Okay, ready for this? Genesis 8. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Isn't the Bible cool? But Noah's not out of the water just yet. At this point, Noah needs to know what it's like outside the sanctuary. Is the outside world a place of chaos and death and uncleanness? Or is it a place of rest, a garden where new life can flourish? Here's what Noah does. From inside the sanctuary, he releases two birds, a raven and a dove. The raven, according to Leviticus 11, is an unclean bird. The dove is clean, and according to Leviticus 5, it can be used as a purification offering. But why release a raven and a dove? Okay, there's so much cool stuff in here. And now that we understand the ancient thinking around the cosmology of creation, the tabernacle and the ark, now that we've seen how atonement keeps these spaces free from corruption, now Noah's simple act of sending out these two birds reveals something pretty incredible. First, Noah sends out the raven. At this point in the story, it's not entirely certain whether the raven comes back or not, and I think that's intentionally unclear. But, well, just wait. It'll become clear pretty soon. You'll see what I mean. The Hebrew Bible is cool. We'll circle back to the raven in a second, but next, Noah sends out the dove. And again, this is so cool. Verse 9, but the dove found no place to rest her foot, and she returned to him in the ark. Apparently, at this point, outside the sanctuary, there is still no rest. And so the dove returns to him. And this is in contrast to the raven, who does not return to him. Doves are domesticated birds. They're famed for their ability to always return home. The dove returns to where she knows she will find rest. She returns to Noah. And this is an act that honors the Edenic command that humans would have dominion over the animals. The dove's food is associated with life, seeds and grains, and on top of all of this, the dove returns with a freshly plucked leaf in her beak. So Noah reaches out his hand and takes the dove into the ark. Where Adam and Eve took from a tree that resulted in death, Noah takes in a dove with a leaf from a tree that signifies life. Back to the raven. Noah sent out the raven first, but in contrast to the dove, the raven refuses to return to Noah. He will not let Noah have dominion over him. Genesis says the raven went to and fro. Another character will do this in the story of Job. The Satan or the Satan figure tells God that he has been going to and fro over the earth. The raven is a scavenger who thrives in a place defined by death. Its food is animal carcasses, and a carcass, death, is the natural end of violence and corruption. The raven belongs in an unclean space, and the raven reveals that outside the ark is still an unclean, chaotic wilderness filled with death and corruption. The leaf in the dove's beak was an olive leaf, and that is a specific detail. In the Bible, olive oil is used to consecrate priests and to anoint the tabernacle and its furnishings. Olive oil is also associated with holiness, and the dove's association with holiness and spirit is an image that permeates the scriptures. Probably the most well-known is when Jesus is baptized. He comes up out of the water, and the heavens are opened, and the Spirit of God descends like a dove and settles on him. That's from Matthew 3:16. Now, there's a slightly controversial passage in 1 Peter, where he describes what happened in the days of Noah, and he links it to baptism. He says, God was patient in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. Corresponding to what? To being brought safely through water. Peter says, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If you're not yet convinced that the flood was primarily a cleansing or a washing away of impurity, maybe Peter will convince you. What did the flood do? It removed dirt. Not dirt from the body or grime from a dish, but it wiped away the dirt of impurity. It cleansed corruption from the face of the earth. And out of the water emerged a new, restored creation. Baptism allows us to participate viscerally and physically in what Jesus has done ahead of us. Jesus died and was raised. And as we go down into the water, our old self is dying. Our fleshly self is dying to sin. And we're being cleansed. Our sin and impurity is being washed away. Peter says Jesus suffered to bring us to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. And as Jesus emerged and rose out of death, so we participate in his resurrection as we emerge and come up out of the water, a new creation, cleansed, spiritually restored. And that's why Peter says baptism saves us through. Did you catch that little detail? According to Peter, we are saved through the resurrection of Jesus. Some people find this passage controversial because Peter says that Jesus went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think the best way to understand this is what the ancient church called the Harrowing of Hades. It's an account of how Jesus descended to the dead, into Hades, and he emptied it of its prisoners. I'll share a link in the description so you can read about it. But Peter says Jesus died in the flesh. And so if we see Jesus acting as the goat that was sent away, bearing all of our sin and impurity, Jesus takes our sin away into the place where it belongs, down into death, and he leaves it there. But unlike the scapegoat, Jesus doesn't stay in the domain of death. In Revelation, he says, I am the first and the last, and the living one. And I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have the keys of death and of Hades. That's why Peter says we are saved through his resurrection. Because I'll die, you'll die, but death has been plundered. The prison doors have been unlocked and thrown open. And we know that if we die with him in a death like his, that we will be raised with him in a resurrection like his. I was going to finish with a verse from 1 Corinthians, but I realized I couldn't stop at just one verse, or 2, or even 3, because it just fit so well. It's like the whole Bible is connected. Seriously, you should go pause the video and go and read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, all of it. It's amazing. But just in case you're driving, or sailing a boat, or walking your goat, I'll read the last few verses for you. 1 Corinthians 15 from verse 50. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor can corruption inherit incorruption. Listen, I am telling you a mystery. We will not all fall asleep, but we will all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be changed. For this corruptible body must be clothed with incorruptibility, and this mortal body must be clothed with immortality. When this corruptible body is clothed with incorruptibility, and this mortal body is clothed with immortality, then the saying that is written will take place. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, death, is your victory? Where, death, is your sting?